I thought I was bringing roses and a gift. Instead, I was met with a locked door and a brother who decided I no longer counted as family. What happened behind that door would change everything. My name was Rachel Porter, 34 years old, and for as long as I could remember, I had lived on the edges of my own family. No matter how many awards I won, no matter how high I climbed in my career at home, I was still the forgotten daughter, the one whose chair at the table always seemed to be missing. I had learned to wear that role like a second skin. But on the night of my mother's 62nd birthday, all the old wounds returned sharper than ever. The heels of my shoes clicked against the marble floor as I stepped into the lobby of Bellini's, one of those Brooklyn restaurants that always seemed to glow under warm amber lights. I clutched a bouquet of white roses in one arm and a small velvet box tucked inside a silver bag in the other. After years of distance, after countless arguments and silences, I wanted tonight to be different. Maybe naively I believed it could be a new beginning. The hostess smiled politely when I approached her desk. I gave her my mother's name, Linda Porter. She nodded, scanning the list. My stomach tightened with anticipation. Just beyond a wooden door down the hall was a private room filled with people I had known my entire life. For a fleeting second, I let myself imagine stepping inside, handing my mother the roses and the bracelet I had chosen after weeks of searching, and maybe, just maybe, feeling like part of the family again. I barely had time to take a step toward the hallway before a tall figure moved into my path. My brother. Michael stood in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the kind of outfit that looked like it came with instructions on how to smirk properly. He crossed his arms, blocking the way. "You're not on the list," he said flatly. At first I thought I had misheard him. The hum of conversations and clinking glasses from inside the dining room buzzed in my ears, distorting the moment. I blinked at him. "What do you mean?" Amanda invited me. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes hard and unyielding. "This is a family gathering. You're not part of it." The words sliced through me with the precision of a blade. 34 years of clawing my way up in a city that devours the week of building a career that most people only dream about, and here was my brother reducing me to nothing with one sentence. His gaze told me I was not just unwelcome. I was irrelevant. I glanced past him. Through the partially open door, I saw the back of my mother's head at the end of the long table, her silver hair pinned neatly, her posture still delicate despite the years. She didn't know I was out here. She hadn't turned to look. For a second, I wanted to push past Michael to make her see me, roses in hand, gift ready. But I knew he wouldn't move. And if I forced it, I would only become the spectacle he wanted me to be. Michael shifted slightly, almost casually, like a bouncer savoring the power of being gatekeeper. Behind him, a burst of laughter carried from the dining room. Maybe it had nothing to do with me. Maybe it was about a story or a toast. But in that instant, it pierced me like a dagger, as if the whole family were laughing at the thought of me standing on the wrong side of that door. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile onto my face, though every muscle in my body wanted to collapse. I extended the bouquet of roses, the petals trembling as my hand shook. "Please give these to Mom," I said quietly. "And this." I held out the gift bag, the pearl bracelet nestled inside its velvet box, something I had chosen after visiting half a dozen jewelers across Manhattan. I had pictured her clasping it on her wrist, smiling at me with pride. Michael took them reluctantly, his fingers brushing mine as though I had handed him spoiled leftovers. "I'll see that she gets them," he said with a cold finality. My chest burned, but years of boardroom negotiations had taught me how to mask pain with composure. I straightened my shoulders, turned away, and forced my legs to move toward the exit. The marble floor echoed my steps, each click sounding like a gavel sealing my exclusion. As I passed the hostess stand, she looked down quickly, pretending to adjust the reservation book, as though embarrassed for me. At nearby tables, I felt the eyes of strangers follow me, their curiosity like a spotlight. A woman in a navy dress, roses, and a gift gone walking alone. They didn't know the story, but they could see the humiliation. My throat tightened, but I refused to let a single tear fall where anyone could witness it. Not here, not tonight. Only when I pushed through the heavy glass doors and felt the cool September night air on my face did I finally let out the breath I had been holding. The city lights blurred in my eyes, though whether from tears or the glare of passing cars I couldn't tell. I had come with hope. I was leaving with nothing but the echo of laughter and the image of my brother's smirk burned into my mind. The roses, the bracelet, the chance for reconciliation, all of it was now trapped behind that door, swallowed by the same family that had never made room for me. I kept walking down the sidewalk, bouquetless, giftless, my arms empty, the night pressing in. Somewhere behind me, inside that glowing restaurant, my mother's birthday celebration carried on without me. And for the first time in years, I felt the truth settle deep in my bones. I wasn't just forgotten. I had been deliberately locked out. The night air clung to me as I walked toward my car, each step heavier than the last. I slid inside the door, shutting with a soft thud that cut me off from the world. My hands trembled against the steering wheel, and suddenly I wasn't 34 anymore. I wasn't the vice president with a view of Manhattan's skyline. I was 10 again, back in the kitchen of our Boston house, listening to the same tone of dismissal I had just heard from my brother's lips. Our house looked picture perfect from the outside, 2-story colonial blue shutters, manicured lawn. My father insisted we cut every Saturday. But inside, the rules belonged to Edward Porter. He enforced them like commandments, and his approval was the currency that determined your worth. Michael was rich in it. I still hear Dad's voice booming from the sidelines at his football games, pride thick enough to fill the air. That same week, I brought home a report card with straight A's and 1 A-. Dad tapped the minus with his finger as if it were a stain and said, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" It wasn't the grade that stung. It was the realization Michael could falter and still be celebrated while I had to be flawless just to be tolerated. Mom sat at the table that day, her hand brushing my shoulder. A silent gesture meant to comfort, but silence can cut as sharply as words. Linda Porter, the woman who once painted landscapes with color and life, had long since put down her brush. Peace in her world was bought by keeping quiet. I learned another lesson the night Michael scraped Dad's car against a mailbox. He confessed with a wince, bracing for punishment. Instead, Dad clapped him on the back. "Boys make mistakes," he said with a chuckle. A week later, when I missed curfew by 10 minutes because I stayed late at the library, he grounded me for a month. It wasn't the punishments that hurt most. It was realizing my father's pride had a home and I was not in it. The birthdays sealed the truth. Michael's 16th arrived with balloons tied to the banister, a rented DJ in the backyard, a silver watch gleaming under the wrapping paper. The house buzzed with neighbors congratulating him as though his future already belonged to greatness. My 16th, a store-bought cake left on the kitchen counter. Dad reminded me not to eat too much sugar. Mom handed me a set of her old watercolors, a fragile attempt to make the day special. I loved them, I really did, but I also saw Dad's expression tighten, as if creativity were a weakness, as if her gift confirmed everything he disapproved of in me. By high school, the roles were cast in stone. Michael the golden son, Rachel, the disappointment. At church, neighbors asked about his games. At dinner, Dad praised his wins. When I won a regional essay contest, he muttered that I was too opinionated and told me to set the table. It was then I began to understand that fairness was not a rule of our household. Fairness was a myth. Looking back, what cut deepest wasn't my father's harshness. It was my mother's silence. She could have spoken up even once, told Dad to stop comparing us, told me I was enough, told Michael that rules applied to him too. But her silence became her armor, and I was left to fight battles no one else wanted to claim. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel, the leather cool against my skin. Brooklyn's noise faded. In my ears, I heard the echoes of that old kitchen, Michael's laughter, Dad's sharp voice, forks scraping against plates, and Mom's lips pressed together like a locked door. And tonight at Bellini's, decades later, it had all repeated. Michael standing like a gatekeeper, savoring my exclusion. My mother seated at the head of the table, her back to me, unaware or unwilling to turn. The pattern unchanged. I drew in a long breath, trying to steady myself. But the truth was clear. The past wasn't just a memory, it was a script my family kept replaying. I started the car but didn't pull out right away. The engine hummed beneath me, headlights casting pale beams into the dark lot. My chest ached with the weight of a question I had never dared to answer. How much longer would I keep knocking on a door that was never meant to open for me? Finally, I shifted into gear and drove out into the night, leaving Bellini's behind. Inside that glowing restaurant, laughter carried on without me. But in my car, in the quiet where no one else could hear, I understood something I had spent my whole life avoiding. I wasn't just left out. I was written out. And the only way forward was to decide whether I would keep fighting for a place in their story or begin writing my own. The memory of leaving Boston for New York in the fall of 2012 is still sharp in my mind, like the chill in the air that bit through my jacket as I dragged 2 suitcases across the campus of NYU. I had just turned 22, stubborn enough to trade the safety of home for the unknown. My father had wanted Boston College and finance. I wanted to do marketing in New York. That was enough to cut the last thread between us. The night I told him, he sat at the head of the kitchen table, his face set like stone. He said calmly that I would not get a penny from him. If I insisted on wasting my life in that city, then I was on my own. I remember the silence that followed, heavy enough to crush the air in my lungs. My mother looked down at her plate, and I understood she would not intervene. I left that summer with 2 worn suitcases, a handful of savings, and no blessing. On the porch, my mother hugged me quickly and pressed an envelope into my hand. Inside were $60 and a short note in her familiar cursive, "For emergencies. Love, Mom." I slipped it into my wallet and carried it with me to New York, though I never spent the bills. They became a reminder that someone still thought of me, even if she could not say it out loud. New York was loud, crowded, and unforgiving. I worked at a cafe near Washington Square Park, pulling double shifts when I could, the smell of coffee beans and grease clinging to my hair. My feet ached, my body ached, but every paycheck was proof that I could stand without anyone's help. At night, I wrote essays under the dim light of a shared dorm room. In my second semester, a paper I submitted to the student newspaper was published. It was a short article about consumer behavior in the digital age, but to me it was everything. I bought 2 copies, one for myself, and one I left in an old box back home during a rare visit. Years later, I would find out my mother had discovered it, folded it neatly, and kept it hidden in her dresser drawer. She never told me, but that knowledge softened something inside me. The summers were the hardest. My classmates left for Europe for internships. I stayed behind the counter at the cafe, sweating under broken air conditioning, saving what I could. Some nights exhaustion turned to tears that I buried in my pillow, but even in those moments I knew I would rather suffer here than bend back toward the house I had left. By junior year, I landed a summer internship at Horizon Media. Walking into their office on Madison Avenue felt like stepping onto a different planet. Glass walls, endless screens, the buzz of people who spoke the language of campaigns and clients. At first, all I did was spreadsheets and errands, but I treated every task like it mattered. When someone asked for a volunteer to stay late, I raised my hand before anyone else. That summer, I lived more in the office than in my dorm. I stayed quiet in meetings but listened carefully, filling notebooks with details. I asked questions no one expected an intern to ask. One evening, as I was organizing samples long after most had gone home, a director stopped by and told me I had potential. Just 3 words, but they carried more weight than years of trying to be enough in my father's house. The distance from home grew. Phone calls with my mother were brief, careful. She asked about classes, never about dreams, her voice hushed, as though someone might overhear. Sometimes a card arrived with a small amount of money folded inside, the kind you could barely notice in a grocery bill. I never cashed them. Instead, I kept the notes, holding on to her handwriting, proof that she hadn't completely let me go. The years blurred into long hours of study shifts at the cafe and the rhythm of the city. Slowly, I realized I was becoming someone new. Not the daughter who was compared, not the girl dismissed, but a woman shaping her own life in a place too vast to care about her father's rules. When graduation came, I walked across the stage in a borrowed gown, clutching the diploma I had fought for with sleepless nights and empty bank accounts. Families filled the seats cheering for their children. I scanned the rows out of habit, but there was no one waving back at me. My seat in the crowd was empty. My father had refused to come, and my mother hadn't dared. The applause roared around me, but I carried only silence with me as I left the stage. The diploma in my hands was both a victory and a wound. I had proven that I could build a life on my own. But I had also proven that I no longer belonged to the life I had left behind. The years after graduation blurred into deadlines, client meetings, and offices that smelled of coffee and dry erase markers. By 28, I was the youngest account director Horizon Media had ever promoted. At 32, my name gleamed on a brass plate outside a corner office vice president of marketing. The Manhattan skyline stretched outside my window like proof that I had climbed higher than anyone expected me to. Every morning I put on the armor-tailored suits, steady voice, the kind of presence that made clients lean in before I even spoke. Every evening, I walked into an apartment polished to perfection, glass walls, minimalist furniture shelves lined with books I hardly had time to read. It was everything I once dreamed of. And yet opening the door at night, silence always greeted me first. Dating became another battlefield. Men admired my ambition until it threatened them. Dinners ended with polite smiles, phones buzzing with sudden emergencies, or the all-too-familiar line, "I need someone who puts family first." Each time I bit back, the retort burning on my tongue. And what family ever put me first? Meanwhile, my friends' lives unfolded in a different rhythm. Engagement announcements, baby showers, first steps, first birthdays, my social media feeds were a carousel of milestones. Smiling couples under balloons, toddlers in tiny Halloween costumes, partners holding hands across candlelit dinners. I would scroll, double tap, even leave a cheerful comment. Then I'd close the app, shut off the phone, and return to campaign briefs glowing on my laptop screen. Deadlines were easier than envy, but the hollowness had a way of sneaking in. At times I stood by my window with a glass of wine, the city glittering below, alive and endless. And yet, despite all that light, I felt the same shadow pressing, and the same one that had followed me from Boston, the shadow of being unseen. Sophia Reed, my closest friend since college, was the only one who could pierce that armor. One evening she arrived with lo mein and a bottle of red. We sprawled on my couch cartons, balanced on our knees, Manhattan glowing behind us. She watched me for a long moment, her gaze patient but unrelenting. "The company treats you like you're irreplaceable," she said finally, "but your family still treats you like you're invisible." Her words cut sharper than she knew. I barked a laugh, sharp and bitter. Invisible. That old label. I raised my glass and muttered, "Well, at least the company sends flowers. My family can't even send a text." Sophia didn't laugh. She just looked at me, steady and sad, like someone watching a person bleed while insisting the wound was nothing. I waved her off, piling sarcasm over the ache. "Invisible isn't so bad. Ghosts don't get hurt. Ghosts get work done." But the mask cracked the second I saw her expression, soft, unwavering, too close to pity. The words stuck in me long after she left. Invisible. Not forgotten. Not ignored. Invisible. That night I stood at my window again, glass in hand, the skyline flickering like 1,000 lives I didn't belong to. My friends built families. I built campaigns. They gathered around dinner tables, traded stories about milestones. I walked into boardrooms, traded strategies, won clients who barely remembered my name a year later. The city roared with life, but inside the echoes were older. The scrape of forks against plates in that Boston kitchen. My father dismissed my work as fluff. Michael mocking the idea that marketing could ever be serious. My mother's silence sealed the verdict. I had climbed every rung, conquered every metric, shattered ceilings that once looked unbreakable. Yet standing in that corner office or that spotless apartment, I was still waiting for something my title, my salary, my skyline view could never give me. I was waiting for someone, anyone, to look at me and say, "I see you. I'm proud of you. and the waiting still hurts. The spring of 2021 arrived with the usual rush of pitches, deadlines, and the constant pressure of staying ahead in an industry where yesterday's triumphs quickly became irrelevant. I had grown used to the rhythm, the long hours, the revolving door of new hires who came and went before their nameplates had time to gather dust. But then Diane Miller walked through Horizon Media's glass doors, and something about her was different. Her resume had been impressive enough to land her the interview, but resumes only told part of the story. What struck me was the energy she carried into the room. She was 30, a little older than the typical new hire, and her portfolio carried a boldness that felt rare. Her work was raw, creative, and risky in the best way. It was the kind of thinking clients either loved or feared. When she sat across from me in the interview, her eyes didn't dart around nervously like most. She looked directly at me, confident without being arrogant, her hands folded calmly on the table. I remember asking her why she had chosen Horizon. She smiled, her voice steady. Because this is where I see campaigns that change things, not just sell things. It was the sort of answer that could have sounded rehearsed, but from her, it rang true. I made my decision that afternoon. In her first week, I assigned Diane to a campaign that mattered. A national brand with a client who was both demanding and skeptical. Some of my colleagues questioned the move. She's new, they said. Too green. But I had a sense she could handle it, and I was not in the habit of ignoring my instincts. I watched her closely in those first weeks. She stayed late sketching ideas, scribbling notes, building mock-ups with the kind of intensity I remembered from my own early years. More than once I walked past her desk after 9 at night and found her still working earbuds and humming quietly as she tapped her pen against the page. When I asked if she ever went home, she grinned and said, "I'm not here because I have to be. I'm here because I want to be." Her first presentation nearly silenced the room. She had pitched a concept that pushed far beyond the client's comfort zone, and I could see the doubt flicker in the senior team's eyes. I waited, then leaned forward. "Let's take a deeper look at this." My words carried weight, and with them the conversation shifted. Diane caught my glance across the table and her shoulders straightened. Later that evening, she stopped by my office, still carrying the adrenaline of the meeting. "You didn't have to defend me," she said. I set my pen down and met her eyes. "You earned it. Playing it safe is the fastest way to be forgotten in this business. Keep pushing," she smiled, then her whole face lighting up, and for a brief second, I saw the spark that had driven me all those years ago when I was still proving myself. Weeks turned into months, and Diane proved herself again and again. Her designs carried a rhythm, a pulse that clients noticed. When a major account praised the creative direction, I made sure to say her name out loud to give her credit she deserved. I remembered too well what it felt like to have your work praised without acknowledgement. What I didn't expect was how often she lingered after meetings, not to talk about assignments, but to ask about my own journey. She wanted to know how I had managed to survive the cutthroat early years, how I had kept going when it would have been easier to quit. "You're the kind of boss I always dreamed of having," she said one evening as we walked out together. "You're the model I measure myself against." I laughed it off, brushing the words away with a half smile, but they stayed with me longer than I admitted. She began to stop by my office just to talk, sometimes about work, sometimes about life. Her questions were thoughtful, her admiration so open it almost startled me. I told myself it was normal. Good leaders inspired loyalty. Good mentors inspired admiration. I had promised myself long ago that I would be the kind of boss I had needed but never had. One late night, as we finalized a campaign that I knew would set a new standard for Horizon, she leaned against the doorframe of my office, her arms crossed, her expression soft. "You know, Rachel," she said, "you're the reason I believe I can do this. I've never had someone to look up to the way I look up to you." Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried something more than admiration. I noticed it only for a second before she looked away. I told myself not to read into it, not to make it more than what it was. She was young, talented, ambitious. To me, she was a rising star, someone to nurture, someone who made me proud to be in the role I had fought so hard to earn. I never asked about her personal life. I didn't know who she loved or what secrets she carried outside the walls of Horizon. At the time, it didn't matter. She was my employee, my protégé, and I saw only her talent and her drive. But life has a way of pulling hidden threads until they unravel everything. I didn't know then that Diane was already tied to me in ways I could not yet imagine. That outside the safety of our office walls, she lived a life that would crash directly into mine. For now, all I knew was that I had found someone remarkable. A young woman who reminded me of myself, hungry to prove her worth, unafraid to take risks. I had welcomed her into my world without hesitation, never realizing just how much of a storm she would bring with her. And storms, once they arrive, never leave anything the same. Inside the private room at Bellini's, the celebration carried on as if nothing had happened at the door. The chandeliers glowed warmly overhead, reflecting in the glasses, but to me the light seemed cold, almost harsh. Plates clattered, glasses chimed the rise and fall of chatter, blending with bursts of laughter. It was the kind of sound that should have meant joy, yet every note carried an edge. My mother sat at the head of the table, her posture graceful but distant. She smiled when servers placed steaming pasta before her, but her eyes looked elsewhere, fixed on some space no one else could see. Michael raised his glass, his voice slicing through the noise like a knife through silk. "Well, looks like Rachel thought she belonged here tonight." He let the pause linger, his smirk widening. But I reminded her, "This is family only." The words settled heavily, as though the air itself thickened. Then came the ripple of laughter, sharp, knowing, eager to echo him. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The cruelty lay in its precision. A cousin leaned just close enough to another for her whisper to carry across the table. No husband, no children, nothing but her job. What kind of family is that? The comment sliced deeper than the laugh. Simple, dismissive, and utterly familiar. That was the refrain of my life, always measured against what I did not have. Their words painted me as hollow, as if achievements meant nothing when not framed by rings or cradles. My chest tightened, not with surprise but with recognition. I had heard versions of this since girlhood. Each repetition only dug the scar deeper. My mother's hands rested in her lap, folded tightly enough that her knuckles whitened. Her shoulders were drawn inward like she was bracing against a wind no one else could feel. She glanced at the bouquet of white roses standing in the vase beside her plate, their petals trembling faintly. For a moment I thought she might reach toward them, claim them as her own, claim me. But her fingers stayed locked together. Michael noticed. Of course he noticed. He had always known where to strike. He shrugged casually, his voice lifting with confidence. "Don't worry, Mom. She made her choice years ago. Her loyalty has always been to herself." A few chuckles followed. Not many, not even loud, but sharp enough to sting. That was the rhythm of their gatherings. Michael set the tone and the rest played along. Then came the gesture that cut deepest. Michael reached across the table, plucked up the velvet box resting near the roses and flicked it open. He dangled the pearl bracelet between two fingers as if it were a trinket from a bargain bin. Maybe she thought this would erase the years she's been gone. Must be nice to buy forgiveness with a paycheck. This time the laughter was quieter, meaner. It slithered around the table rather than rising. A smirk here, a shake of the head there. Their mockery no longer sounded like amusement. It sounded like agreement with a verdict already passed. But my mother did not laugh. She stared at the roses, at the bracelet. Her lips pressed so tightly they looked bloodless. Her glass trembled in her hand, and when she set it back down, the sound of it hitting the table was louder than it should have been. For a brief second, the room stilled. The silence wasn't merciful. It was suffocating. No one looked at her. Their eyes stayed fixed on Michael, still feeding on his certainty. But I saw the regret carved into her face, the battle she would not let surface. And in that instant, I understood something I had always feared. My mother's silence wasn't emptiness. It was surrender. The laughter returned, brittle and thin. It bounced off glassware, echoed against porcelain, but it no longer rang with ease. It sounded forced, strained, like a performance continuing past its natural end. The celebration wore its mask well. Wine poured. Forks lifted, conversations resumed. But beneath the glow of the chandeliers, the air felt weighted. It was less a birthday dinner than a courtroom, less a toast than a trial. And the verdict was clear. My absence was guilt. My silence was proof. Still the roses stood upright in their vase, the bracelet gleamed against its dark lining. They were small, stubborn reminders that exclusion was not the same as defeat. And though the party pressed forward, a quiet unease threaded itself through the room, invisible yet undeniable, like a storm gathering on the horizon. The laughter was still bouncing off the walls when Diane pushed her chair back. The scrape of wood against tile cut through the noise like a blade. Conversations faltered. Aunts turned their heads, and Michael looked up in surprise as his fiancée rose to her feet. Her voice was steady, sharper than anyone expected. "You're talking about my boss." The words landed like glass shattering. The room froze. A fork clattered against a plate, and then silence pressed down heavy and complete. Every eye swung toward Diane, mouths slightly open, as though they needed time to process what she had just said. At the head of the table, my mother's hand slipped. Her wineglass toppled crimson, spilling across the white tablecloth, seeping into the linen like blood. She didn't reach to clean it. She just stared at Diane, her eyes wide, her lips parted. Michael blinked, his face draining of color before flushing crimson. "What did you just say?" His voice cracked at the edges, stripped of its earlier arrogance. Diane didn't flinch. She looked around the table, meeting the gaze of each relative who had joined in the chorus of mockery minutes before. "Rachel Porter is my boss. She is the vice president of marketing at Horizon Media, and she is the best leader I have ever had." Gasps rippled through the room. An uncle coughed into his napkin, and Aunt muttered something under her breath, but no one dared to laugh now. The chandeliers above seemed to burn brighter in the silence. Diane straightened her shoulders, her voice growing stronger. "I have worked for her for months. I have seen her stay in the office until midnight side by side with her team, never asking anyone to do what she would not do herself. I have watched her fight to make sure credit goes where it belongs, even when it would have been easier to take it for herself. She is respected, admired, and trusted. She is everything you claim she is not." Linda's hand trembled against the table, her knuckles white. She pressed her napkin into the spilled wine, but her eyes never left Diane. For the first time in years, a flicker of pride lit in her expression, fragile but undeniable. Michael's jaw tightened. "That's enough, Diane. Sit down." His voice carried the brittle edge of a man losing control, the same control he had held over the room all evening. But Diane didn't sit. She took a step away from the table, her gaze locking on Michael. "Enough is when you stop tearing down a woman who has built everything with her own hands. Enough is when you stop pretending her success is meaningless just because it doesn't fit your idea of family." The room was still dead. Forks hovered above plates, glasses paused midair. No one moved. An older cousin cleared his throat awkwardly. "Are you saying Rachel is your direct boss?" Diane nodded firmly. "Yes, and I am proud to work for her. She is the reason I know what kind of career I want to build. She is the reason I believe I can succeed." Michael's face burned red, his smirk long gone. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. The velvet box on the table caught the light, the pearl bracelet gleaming against its dark lining. For the first time, no one mocked it. No one laughed. They only stared at it and at the roses still standing in their vase beside my mother's plate, their white petals untouched. Linda lifted her eyes at last. For a moment she looked straight at Diane, then at the bracelet, and then toward the door that I had walked through hours earlier. Her lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but no words came. Still, the silence carried a weight that hadn't been there before. It was no longer empty. It was heavy with the truth Diane had just dropped into the center of the room. The relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier laughter turning sour in their throats. No one dared to echo Michael now. No one dared to sneer. Diane's voice softened, but it was no less firm. You wanted to humiliate her tonight, but I won't let you. You should know who she really is. The chandeliers flickered slightly as if the very air in the room had shifted. Michael sank slowly back into his chair, his face dark, his glass untouched. The party had changed. The balance had shifted. For the first time, the truth about me had been spoken aloud in that room, and they had no choice but to hear it. The next morning, I walked into Horizon Media with my usual armor on. A navy blazer, hair pulled back tight, eyes sharp. No one could guess the storm still churning inside me from the night before. I had buried it under my morning routine, under coffee and emails, under the rhythm of control. Or at least I thought I had. Just before noon, there was a knock on my office door. Diane stood there, her shoulders tense, her eyes rimmed with something that looked like guilt. She clutched a folder against her chest as if it could shield her. "Do you have a minute?" she asked softly. I motioned for her to come in, though my pulse quickened. She closed the door behind her, hesitated, then sat down across from me. For a long moment, she didn't speak, just twisted the edge of the folder in her hands until the paper inside crumpled. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I should have told you earlier." My stomach tightened. "Tell me what—" Her voice broke on the words. "I'm engaged to Michael." The air in the room seemed to vanish. I stared at her, waiting for the joke, the correction, something to soften the blow. But her eyes were wide and earnest, her hands shaking slightly as she placed the folder on my desk. "My brother," I whispered more to myself than to her. She nodded, shame coloring her cheeks. "Yes." I leaned back, trying to steady myself against the wave of shock crashing through me. My brother's fiancée, my employee. The woman who had stood up for me in front of my family was tethered to the very man who had humiliated me. "Rachel, I swear I didn't mean for it to happen this way. When I interviewed for this job, I had no idea you were his sister. He never mentioned you by name, not really. Not the way he should have." My throat tightened. "What do you mean?" Diane took a shaky breath. "He always referred to you as his little sister who never made anything of herself. He called you a failure more times than I can count. He said you worked in some low-level advertising job, that you never came around because you couldn't handle family responsibility." I laughed bitterly, though it sounded more like a choke. "That sounds like him. But that's not what I found when I started here," she said quickly. "From the first week I saw who you really are. You lead with strength and fairness. You push people to do their best without tearing them down. You've built this career with grit and brilliance. You're the reason I believe I can do more than I thought I could." Her words should have felt like balm, but instead they scraped raw against old wounds. Michael had spent years shaping how others saw me, and now even his fiancée had been poisoned by his lies before she met me. I pressed my palms against the desk, grounding myself. "And yet you're going to marry him." She flinched. "That's what I'm questioning." Silence stretched between us. Outside my window, the city buzzed with its usual noise horns, blaring voices, rising life, moving forward as if nothing had shifted. But inside my office, everything felt precarious, as though one wrong word might send both of us over the edge. Diane's voice dropped to a whisper. "Last night changed something. I've never seen him look so cruel. I've never seen a family dismiss someone so coldly. And when you walked away, he smirked. He smirked, Rachel. Like it was a victory to shut you out." My chest burned. That smirk had followed me all the way home, haunting me even in the dark. Diane clasped her hands together tightly. "I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop wondering if this is the man I'm supposed to spend my life with." I studied her, the conflict carved into every line of her face. Part of me wanted to push her away, to tell her this wasn't my burden to carry. But another part recognized the fracture already splitting her engagement. Michael's lies were unraveling, and for the first time someone inside his world was beginning to see me clearly. "You have to make your own choices," I said. Finally. My voice steady, though my hands trembled. "But don't let him convince you that cruelty is strength." Her eyes filled, though no tears fell. "Thank you," she whispered. She stood slowly gathering her folder, but before she reached the door, she turned back. "For what it's worth last night, I was proud to defend you. And I won't forget the way the room went silent when the truth finally cut through." When she left, I sank back into my chair, my pulse still racing. The shock of her revelation pressed hard against me, heavier than I wanted to admit. Michael's fiancée. My employee. The tangled web had been pulled tight, and there was no escaping the storm it promised. I stared out at the skyline, the city unbothered by my turmoil, and realized the lies Michael had spun were finally cracking. The truth was beginning to seep through, and the consequences were only just beginning. 2 nights later, Sophia called, just as I was finishing a late meeting. Her voice carried the calm of a lawyer, but beneath it I heard something urgent. "We need to talk, Rachel. It's about your father." I shut my office door, leaning back against the desk. "What now?" She hesitated, choosing her words with care. "He's drafting a new will. One of my colleagues in Boston flagged it. Your brother is pushing hard to have you cut out completely." For a moment, the words didn't register. Cut out. I almost laughed because I had never asked for a cent from that house. I had built everything on my own, paid for every degree, every apartment, every meal. But the blow still landed. "Michael is framing it as preserving the family home," she continued. "He says it should stay intact with him as caretaker." Tradition. Tradition. I nearly spat the word. Michael never cared about tradition unless it served him. He didn't want to preserve the house on Walnut Street. He wanted to sell it, strip it bare, and pocket the profit. But the thought of that house tightened something in my chest. I hadn't lived there in over a decade yet. Every corner carried ghosts. The staircase where I used to sit at night listening to arguments that shook the walls. The kitchen table where my father tapped my report card like it was a ledger of failures. The narrow bedroom upstairs where I hid notebooks under the bed, the only place I let myself dream. "I never wanted the house," I whispered. "I just wanted to belong in it." Sophia's tone softened. "I know. But if Michael succeeds, it won't just be about property. He'll have control over the estate, over your mother, and you'll be erased from the record." I pressed my palms to my temples. Of course it wasn't enough for Michael to humiliate me at Bellini's. Now he wanted me deleted from the family story altogether. Why now? My voice came out low, uneven. "Because your mother's health is under review," Sophia said. "Your father wants everything locked down. And because your success unsettles Michael. He can't control it, so he's doubling down on what he can." Her words coiled tight inside me. Diane's confession, Michael's lies, his smirk when he blocked the door, all of it was part of the same pattern. He didn't just want me excluded. He wanted me invisible. Sophia didn't soften this time. "You need to be ready. If this becomes formal, I'll represent you. But you have to understand your brother is playing the long game." I stared out the window at the Manhattan skyline, lights winking against the night. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to hurl the nearest glass against the wall. I didn't care about their money. I didn't want their house. But the thought of my name being scrubbed away as if I had never existed cut deeper than anything else. "I'll think about it," I said finally, though my voice sounded far away. "Think fast," she warned. "This won't wait." After she hung up, I stayed in my office long past midnight. The files on my desk blurred deadlines meaningless. All I could see was the house in Boston with its blue shutters, the room still echoing with years of silence and dismissal. And in my mind, I saw Michael's hand erasing my name like chalk wiped from a board. It wasn't about the will. It was about being erased like I had never been there at all. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in weeks. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me said the answer. When I did, it was my mother's voice, softer than I remembered, carrying a tremor I had never heard. "Rachel, could we meet? Just the two of us." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My instinct was to brace for disappointment, to assume it would be another half-hearted attempt at smoothing over what Michael had broken. But there was urgency in her tone that unsettled me. We agreed on a small cafe in Manhattan, one she remembered from visits long ago when she and my father would come into the city for shows. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting by the window, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Her hair, once the silver crown of every family portrait, seemed thinner under the morning light. She looked up as I approached, her eyes searching mine with something raw and unfamiliar. I sat down, setting my bag on the chair beside me, waiting for her to speak. For years, she had chosen silence. What could possibly be different now? She cleared her throat, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been quiet too long. That night at the party, when they shut you out, when Michael said those things, I couldn't stand it. I stiffened, unsure whether anger or relief would win out in me. Mom, you didn't say anything. You didn't stop him. Her eyes glistened. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But you know how your father is. You know how Michael thrives when he's in his shadow. Speaking up in that room would have lit a fire. I wasn't sure I could survive. I leaned back, biting down on the words that wanted to spill. She was right. I did know. But knowing didn't make the wound hurt less. Her hand trembled as she reached into her purse and pulled out a small bundle of folded papers yellowed at the edges from being handled too many times. She slid them across the table toward me. I frowned, unfolding them carefully. My breath caught when I saw what they were. My first article from NYU's student paper, the one about digital consumer behavior. A copy of my internship evaluation at Horizon Media, glowing with praise. A certificate from a regional marketing award I had won early in my career. I stared at them, my fingers trembling. How did you get these? Her lips curved into a small, sorrowful smile. You think I wasn't proud, Rachel? That I didn't follow everything you did? Your father never wanted me to keep these. He said your work was meaningless. But every time I found something, I saved it. I tucked it away where he couldn't see. I've carried them for years. A lump rose in my throat. All those nights I thought I was invisible to her. All those years I thought her silence meant indifference. She had been watching. She had been saving pieces of me. I whispered, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Her voice cracked. Because I was afraid. Afraid of your father. Afraid of losing the fragile piece in that house. But the truth is, I lost you instead. The words pierced me deeper than I expected. Tears stung my eyes before I could stop them. For decades I had told myself I didn't need her recognition, that I had survived without it. Yet hearing her admit it, hearing her say she had chosen silence over me, shattered something inside and mended it all at once. She reached across the table, her hand covering mine. Rachel, I can't undo the years I failed you, but I don't want to be silent anymore. Not when it comes to you. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I saw her not as the quiet woman who stood in the background of my father's shadow, but as a mother finally daring to step forward. I swallowed hard, my voice trembling. Mom, I needed this. I needed to know you saw me. Her grip tightened, her eyes, shining with tears she didn't wipe away. I've always seen you. I just never had the courage to say it. We sat there in the small cafe, the world moving around us, cups clinking, conversations buzzing. But for once it felt like time had stopped. She had broken through the silence of decades, and I was no longer a daughter unseen. When I finally walked out onto the street, the bundle of papers pressed against my chest, I felt both heavier and lighter. Heavier with the weight of years gone, lighter with the fragile beginning of something new. The silence had cracked, and I knew it would never be the same again. The call came late on a Sunday. Michael's voice thundered through the line before I could even say hello. I know about you and Mom. You think you can sneak behind my back, play the victim, and steal her from me. I stayed silent long enough to let his rage echo into the void. Then I said evenly, She's not yours to steal. She's our mother. His growl was sharp like glass splintering. Family meeting. Tomorrow night. Everyone will be there. You want to play this game? Let's play it in the open. The next evening I walked into my parents' living room, the same one I had avoided for years. The curtains were drawn tight, the air heavy with tension. A circle of faces filled the room. Aunts, uncles, cousins, shifting in their seats. Some curious, some uncomfortable. At the center stood Michael, jaw-clenched, arms folded, his fiancée seated behind him with her lips pressed tight. My father sat in his armchair, unmoving, a silent judge, presiding over his chosen heir. My mother sat near the corner, hands folded in her lap, her face pale but resolute. She didn't look at me right away, but I saw her fingers tremble against the fabric of her skirt. Michael began without ceremony. "She's been poisoning Mom against me. Pretending she cares after all these years just to grab sympathy. That's what Rachel does. She pretends. She puts on a show at work, then comes here and tries to rewrite history." I clenched my hands together to keep from shaking. "That's not true. I didn't ask Mom to meet me. She asked me." Michael sneered. "And of course you ran to her, clutching your little stories, your pity papers, trying to make her believe you've done something with your life." Diane's chair scraped against the floor as she stood suddenly. "Enough, Michael." His head whipped toward her. "Sit down." Her chin lifted. "No, I've listened to you twist the truth long enough. You keep acting like being the son makes you right, like your word is the only one that counts. But I've seen Rachel in action. She's not pretending. She's everything you said she wasn't." The room erupted with whispers, relatives glancing between them, the air electric with shock. Michael's face darkened, but Diane didn't waver. "You mock her for building a career, but you don't see the respect she's earned. She works harder than anyone I've ever known. She lifts people up instead of tearing them down. If anyone here is pretending, it's you." My chest tightened at her words, at the courage it must have taken to speak them in front of my father. One of my cousins cleared his throat awkwardly. "I've worked in finance for years. I've read about Horizon Media. They're not small. Rachel's name is out there. You can't call that nothing." An aunt added quietly. "She was always the smart one. Maybe we didn't want to admit it, but she was." The tide shifted, voices, murmuring, some supportive, others uncertain. For the first time in years, cracks appeared in Michael's unshakable wall of control. He turned on me, then eyes blazing. "Look what you've done. You pit them against me." I forced myself to meet his glare. "I didn't do anything. I just lived my life. You're the one who couldn't stand it." My father's voice cut through the noise, low and firm. "Enough." He looked at me with cold detachment, his gaze heavy with judgment. "This family does not air its dirty laundry. Michael has carried its name. He will continue to do so." The silence that followed was suffocating. His words were final, an old gavel striking down, dismissing everything I had accomplished. But then softly another voice rose. It was my mother. "No, Edward. Not this time." The entire room stilled. She lifted her head, her hands no longer trembling. "For years I stayed quiet. For years I let you decide what mattered. But I will not let you erase our daughter again." Gasps echoed my relatives, shifting uncomfortably, eyes darting between my mother and father. Michael's face flushed crimson, his mouth opening and closing like he'd lost the script. The living room had never felt smaller, the walls pressing in with the weight of secrets finally breaking loose. My family was splitting right before me, the loyalties shifting, the old order crumbling. And for once, Michael's smirk was gone. 6 months later, I opened the door to my Manhattan apartment, the hum of the city drifting in from the street below, and welcomed the first of my guests. The evening was quiet compared to the chaos of family gatherings past, but it carried a warmth I hadn't felt in years. That night was not about duty or appearances. That night was about celebration. Horizon Media had just promoted me to senior vice president, and for the first time in my life, the achievement felt shared. The living room glowed with soft light, the shelves lined with flowers sent from colleagues and friends. Sophia arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine tucked under her arm and her quick smile that always steadied me. Behind her came a few close friends from the firm, their laughter filling the space, coats tossed over chairs, voices overlapping with affection instead of rivalry. Then the elevator chimed again, and when I turned, my mother was there. She stepped inside, slowly dressed simply but with a presence that made the room pause. On her wrist shimmered the pearl bracelet I had given her on her 62nd birthday, the same one Michael had taken from me at Bellini's. It caught the light as she reached for my hand. "You look beautiful," she said softly, her eyes holding mine with no hesitation this time. "So do you?" I whispered, my throat tightening. We hugged, and for once, it wasn't tentative. It was full and real, the kind of embrace I had longed for since childhood. When we pulled apart, she glanced around my apartment, her gaze resting on the photos on my wall, the books stacked on the shelves, the small signs of a life built entirely on my own terms. "I am proud of you, Rachel." The words were quiet but clear, and they landed in me like sunlight breaking through clouds. Later, Diane arrived, not with Michael at her side, but alone. She had ended the engagement weeks after that disastrous family meeting, and though the decision had left her shaken, she had chosen to stay at Horizon. In time, she had become more than an employee. She had become an ally, a sister I hadn't expected. She smiled as she joined the group, handing me a card with neat handwriting inside. "Thank you for showing me what strength really looks like." I hugged her, realizing that sometimes family was not chosen by blood, but by truth. The night moved easily. Glasses clinked, stories spilled, laughter rose without malice. Sophia toasted to my promotion, her voice steady and proud, and the room filled with applause that didn't sting or suffocate. My mother clapped too, her bracelet flashing under the lamplight, a symbol that what was once rejected was now honored. I looked around at the circle of people gathered in my apartment, and I felt something I had never felt in my father's house: belonging. It was fragile and imperfect, but it was real. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared, and maybe they never would, but they no longer defined me. As the evening wound down, I stepped out onto the balcony for a moment of quiet. The city stretched out beneath me, endless and alive. I thought of Michael, of the house in Boston, of the years I had fought to be seen. And I thought of the faces inside my apartment, the ones who had chosen to see me without condition. My voice broke into the night, not loud but certain. Worth did not come from the acceptance of those who refused to recognize us. It came from the ones who truly saw us. I breathed in the cool air, letting the truth settle deep. For the first time, the door I had been knocking on all my life no longer mattered. I had built my own, and it was wide open. If you have ever been left out or silenced by the very people who were supposed to stand by you, I want you to remember this. Their rejection does not define you. Your value is not measured by the ones who turn their backs, but by the life you build and the people who choose to walk beside you. Family is not always the house we were born into. Sometimes it is the circle we gather later, the friends, the allies, the quiet souls who see our strength when others refuse to. Have you ever faced that kind of rejection in your own family? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there may need to hear your words tonight. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe for more true stories of resilience and redemption. And always remember, the people who truly see your worth are often not the ones you expected, but the ones who stand with you without conditions. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to keep writing your own story.
"Look at you, still wearing those cheap clothes," Vanessa smirked as she sauntered into my living room, her designer handbag swinging from her freshly manicured fingers. I, on the other hand, just had the most amazing transformation. Want to guess how much my new face cost? I stared at my sister-in-law, my heart pounding against my chest as the realization hit me. The sudden changes in her appearance, the bandages barely hidden by her expensive sunglasses, and that smug smile that seemed even more pronounced than usual. It all made terrible sense. "You didn't," I whispered, my fingers clutching the edge of my coffee table. "My name is Olivia Chen, and at 32, I just discovered my sister-in-law had stolen my $300,000 inheritance to fund her extreme plastic surgery makeover. The money my grandmother had left me, meant to start my own small animal rescue, gone. All because I trusted my husband when he said adding Vanessa to our joint account would help with family expenses while she got back on her feet. Oh, but I did. Vanessa practically sang, settling herself onto my couch like she owned it. And honestly, you should thank me. That money was just sitting there, while I put it to good use. Look at how gorgeous I am now. I felt my world spinning, but years of working as a veterinary technician had taught me to keep calm in crisis situations. Does Marcus know about this? I asked, referring to my husband, her brother. Vanessa's new lips curled into a cruel smile. Marcus, please, he's been so busy with his new promotion, he barely checks the accounts anymore. Besides, what's he going to do? I'm his baby sister. She was right about one thing. Marcus had been distracted lately, pulling long hours at his new executive position. We barely talked anymore, ships passing in the night. I'd been waiting for the right moment to tell him about my plans for the inheritance, to show him the business plan I carefully crafted for my rescue center. Now it seemed that moment would never come. You had no right, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. That money was left to me by my grandmother. She knew how much I wanted to help animals, to make a difference. Oh, spare me the St. Olivia routine. Vanessa cut in, rolling her eyes. Your precious little animal shelter dream. Get real, I've done you a favor. Now you can stop pretending you're anything more than Marcus's plain little wife. At least one of us is doing something meaningful with their life. The casual cruelty of her words hit me like physical blows, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Instead, I thought about the last conversation I'd had with my grandmother, just days before she'd passed away. Olivia, my dear, she'd said, her fragile hand squeezing mine. I've watched you work so hard, saving every penny, helping every stray that crossed your path. This money, it's not just an inheritance, it's an investment in your dreams. Don't let anyone take that away from you. I promised her I wouldn't, and now here I was, watching my sister-in-law flaunt her stolen surgery, paid for with my grandmother's legacy. You should leave now, I said quietly, standing up. And Vanessa, you might want to ice that nose. It's starting to look a bit swollen. Her hand flew to her face, panic briefly replacing her smugness. Good. At least the Queen of Perfection still had something to worry about. After she left, I sat down at my computer and began to type. First, I pulled up all the bank statements, documenting every transfer Vanessa had made. Then I started researching the plastic surgery center she'd used, their policies, their payment procedures, their legal obligations regarding fraudulent payments. What Vanessa didn't know was that before becoming a vet tech, I'd spent 3 years working in medical insurance claims. I knew exactly how these high-end clinics operated, and more importantly, I knew their weaknesses. My phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. Working late again. Don't wait up. I stared at the message, thinking about how distant we'd become, how he'd insisted I add Vanessa to our account despite my misgivings. She's family, he'd said. Don't you trust me? Well, he was right about one thing. She was family, and sometimes family needed to learn the hard way about consequences. I opened my email and began composing a message to the surgery center's compliance department, then another to my grandmother's lawyer, who'd helped set up the inheritance. Finally, I reached out to my old colleague from the insurance company, the one who now worked as a fraud investigator. Vanessa thought she'd won, that her new face was worth destroying my dreams, but she'd forgotten something crucial about me. I'd spent my entire career helping injured animals heal. I knew all about patience, about waiting for the right moment to act, about the importance of thorough documentation. And most importantly, I knew that sometimes the best revenge wasn't swift or dramatic. Sometimes it was methodical, carefully planned, and executed with surgical precision. As I worked late into the night, gathering evidence and building my case, I thought about my grandmother's words again. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Don't worry, Gran, I thought as I attached the final documents to my emails. I won't. Vanessa wanted a transformation. Well, she was about to get one, just not the kind she'd paid for with my money. The response from the surgery center's compliance department arrived faster than I expected. Dear Ms. Chen, we take allegations of fraudulent payments very seriously. Our legal team will be in touch within 24 hours. I closed my laptop and looked at the empty side of our bed where Marcus should have been. It was 2 a.m. and he still wasn't home. Another late night at the office, or so he claimed. Part of me wondered if he already knew what his sister had done. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Having some complications with the healing. Need another $5,000 for follow-up procedures. Take it from the account, or I'll tell Marcus about your secret meetings with his boss. I stared at the message, almost laughing at her attempt at blackmail. The secret meetings had been about planning Marcus's surprise birthday party 3 months ago. But Vanessa had always been good at twisting reality to suit her needs. The next morning, I walked into the veterinary clinic where I worked, trying to maintain my normal routine. I was checking on a recovering German Shepherd when my phone rang. Marcus's boss, David. Olivia. Just got a strange call from the fraud department at First National. Something about large transfers to a plastic surgery center. They're asking about signatures and authorizations. My heart raced. The wheels were already in motion. Yes, I was going to talk to you about that. My sister-in-law made some unauthorized transactions. I may need to take a few personal days to handle this. David's voice softened. Take all the time you need. And Olivia? Marcus doesn't know yet, does he? No, I admitted. I'm handling it my way first. After hanging up, I checked my email. The surgery center's legal team had sent a detailed questionnaire about the transactions. They were particularly interested in the intake forms Vanessa had signed, forms where she claimed the money was gifted to her. I filled out everything meticulously, attaching bank statements, text messages, and emails that proved the money was my inheritance. Then I added the recent blackmail attempt for good measure. Just as I finished, the clinic's front door chimed. I looked up to see Vanessa storming in, her face partly obscured by large sunglasses despite the cloudy day. What did you do? She hissed, getting dangerously close to the counter where a mother and her child were filling out paperwork. The surgery center just called. They're talking about payment verification and fraud investigations. I smiled politely at the startled clients before leading Vanessa to a private examination room. Lower your voice, I said calmly. You wouldn't want to strain your newly reconstructed vocal cords. She ripped off her sunglasses, revealing significant bruising around her eyes. Fix this now, she demanded. Tell them it was a gift. Tell them you authorized everything. I leaned against the examination table, crossing my arms. Like you told Marcus about taking the money? Or did you think I wouldn't notice the forged signatures on the transfer documents? Vanessa's face, what was visible under the swelling, paled slightly. He's my brother. He'll understand once I explain. Explain what? I cut in. How you stole his wife's inheritance? How you forged documents? How you tried to blackmail me this morning? The surgery center has quite a thick file on you now, Vanessa, and it's not just them asking questions. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin. You don't want to do this, Olivia. I can make your life very difficult. Who do you think Marcus will believe? His loving sister or his boring little wife who's never quite fit into the family? I carefully removed her hand, noting the fresh bruises her grip had left. That's assault, Vanessa. In a medical facility with cameras. Would you like me to add that to the file too? For the first time, I saw real fear flash across her face. What do you want? She whispered. I want my money back, every penny, plus interest. You have 48 hours to figure it out before I let the investigation proceed. Oh, and you might want to ice that eye. The swelling's getting worse. After she stormed out, I documented the assault and added the security footage to my growing file. Then I called my grandmother's lawyer again. The surgery center's preparing to reverse the procedures, he confirmed. They can't risk a fraud investigation. Their reputation would be ruined. But Olivia, you should know. Marcus called me this morning. My heart stopped. What did you tell him? The truth. That his sister stole your inheritance and used it for unauthorized cosmetic procedures. He's not taking it well. I thanked him and hung up, my hands shaking slightly. Then I heard familiar footsteps in the hallway. Marcus. He appeared in the doorway of the examination room, his face ashen. Tell me it's not true, he said quietly. Tell me my sister didn't steal from you. I pulled out my phone and showed him the documentation. The transfers, the forged signatures, this morning's blackmail attempt. With each swipe, his expression grew darker. I trusted her, he said, his voice breaking. I insisted you add her to the account. This is my fault. No, I replied, touching his arm gently. It's Vanessa's fault, and she's going to fix it. Just then, my phone buzzed with another message from Vanessa. You win. I'm taking out a loan to repay everything, but don't think this is over. I showed Marcus the text. She's right about one thing, I said. It's not over. The surgery center is launching a full investigation into her case. Apparently, she's not the first person to try this kind of fraud. Marcus sat heavily in the nearest chair. All those late nights I've been working, I was trying to save up to help you start your animal rescue. I wanted it to be a surprise. And all this time, Vanessa was. I felt tears prick my eyes for the first time since this began. We'll start over, I said firmly. Together. But first, your sister needs to learn that actions have consequences. As if on cue, my phone rang, the surgery center's legal team. They wanted to know if I pressed charges once their investigation was complete. I looked at Marcus, who nodded slowly. Yes, I said into the phone. I think it's time everyone learned exactly what happens when you steal someone else's dreams. 3 months later, I stood in front of the newly renovated building that would soon become Hope's Haven Animal Rescue, named after my grandmother. The inheritance money had been fully restored with interest after the surgery center's investigation concluded. Vanessa hadn't gone quietly. The day after she took up a loan to repay me, she'd shown up at our house, her partially reversed procedures making her face look oddly distorted. You've ruined everything, she'd screamed, mascara running down her cheeks. The surgery center's filing a report about me. Do you know what this will do to my reputation? About the same thing you tried to do to my dreams, I'd replied calmly, watching as Marcus escorted his sister off our property. The surgery center's investigation had revealed a pattern. Vanessa had attempted similar schemes before, using other people's accounts and forged documents. The only difference was that this time she'd picked the wrong target. You did the right thing, Marcus said now, standing beside me as we looked at the rescue center's fresh paint and new signage. Vanessa needed to face consequences for once in her life. He'd been true to his word about starting over together. The long nights at the office had turned into evenings spent helping me plan the rescue center. Every wall we'd painted, every renovation we'd overseen, had helped rebuild not just the building, but our trust in each other. My phone buzzed. A text from David, Marcus's boss. Board approved your proposal. The company's annual charity donation will go to Hope's Haven. Congratulations. I showed Marcus the message, feeling tears of joy fill my eyes. The rescue center would have corporate backing, ensuring we could help even more animals than I'd originally planned. Look who finally showed up, Marcus muttered, nodding toward the street. Their parents were walking toward us, looking uncomfortable but determined. They hadn't spoken to us since Vanessa's schemes were exposed, choosing instead to believe her claims of being set up. We owe you an apology, their father said gruffly. We found out about the other incidents, the pattern of behavior we ignored for too long. Vanessa's agreed to get counseling, their mother added quietly. Real counseling, not just cosmetic fixes. I nodded, accepting their words but maintaining my distance. Trust, like the rescue center, would need to be rebuilt slowly, with careful attention to foundation and structure. Later that evening, as Marcus and I sat on our porch swing, I pulled out the last photo taken of my grandmother and me. What do you think she'd say about all this? I asked. Marcus smiled, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. I think she'd say her granddaughter turned out to be exactly who she knew you were, someone who doesn't just rescue animals, but knows how to stand up for what's right. A week later, we held the grand opening of Hope's Haven. As I cut the ribbon, surrounded by supporters and 4 live friends waiting for their forever homes, I caught a glimpse of someone watching from across the street. Vanessa, her face now mostly healed but noticeably different from her original features, stood in the shadows. Our eyes met briefly before she turned and walked away, her designer handbag replaced by a sensible tote, her confident strut now a humble stride. I focused back on the ceremony, on the dreams that were finally becoming reality. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better, about building something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. Ready to start saving lives? Marcus asked, holding open the door to our new rescue center. I smiled, thinking of my grandmother's words about not letting anyone take away my dreams. More than ready, I replied. After all, everyone deserves a chance at transformation, even if it's not the kind they originally had in mind. As we walked into Hope's Haven together, I knew this was just the beginning. Not just of my dream to help animals in need, but of a new chapter where I'd finally learn to stand up for myself, to protect what mattered, and to turn betrayal into something beautiful. The first rescue dog we'd taken in, A three-legged pit bull with soulful eyes thumped his tail in greeting. Sometimes the best transformations, I realized, weren't the ones you paid for with stolen money. They were the ones you earned through perseverance, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what was right.